The grand ballroom of Zytheria's royal palace gleamed like a star in the night. Light flowed from crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling like frozen rivers of silver. Alien nobles filled the room, their eyes reflecting the glow of the lights, and their voices hummed in a soft musical tone that sounded almost like wind through tall crystal towers. The music played from instruments that none of the humans had ever seen, long, twisting tubes with strings that floated in mid-air, creating notes that danced and shimmered around the room. Despite the grandeur, there was a strange tension in the air. The royal ball was meant to celebrate unity among the different alien clans of Zytheria. But tonight, whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. "Have you heard? A human will attend the ball," one noble whispered, his multi-jointed fingers trembling slightly. "A human here?" Another replied, tilting her head in disbelief. The word human carried weight, fear, curiosity, and excitement all mixed into one. Humans were a rare species in this part of the galaxy, and most aliens considered them fragile and unremarkable. To see one in their most sacred palace was almost unthinkable. Meanwhile, Princess Lyra sat on a balcony that overlooked the glittering crowd below. Her gown shimmered with colors that shifted like liquid rainbows, a sign of her royal status. Yet her posture was distant, almost melancholic. Her large, luminescent eyes scanned the ballroom without really seeing it. Nobles danced and laughed below, their strange alien features twisting in ways humans could not understand. But Lyra felt none of the joy that surrounded her. She had spent her entire life among these people, yet she always felt apart, as though a thin wall separated her from the world. Lyra's loneliness was not born of choice. She was expected to follow strict rules, rules that defined every moment of her life. She had to smile at the right time, speak with the right tone, and dance in the ways her ancestors had taught her. But none of this touched her heart. She longed for something more, someone who could see beyond the palace walls, beyond the expectations, and understand her for who she truly was. The music swelled, and a group of nobles began a ceremonial dance. Their movements were precise and beautiful, a blend of elegance and ritual, yet it felt mechanical to Lyra. She sighed quietly, the sound lost amid the glittering chaos below. For a brief moment she closed her eyes, wishing she could vanish from the golden cage that surrounded her. A soft murmur floated across the balcony. "Your Highness," a voice said. Lyra opened her eyes to see her advisor, an older alien named Tavrik, standing behind her. His skin shimmered like polished stone, and his many eyes blinked in a pattern that humans would have found unsettling, though Lyra had long grown accustomed to it. "Do you expect me to enjoy this, Tavrik?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Tavrik tilted his head, a gesture of both respect and concern. "Your Highness, tonight is important for the kingdom. You must participate even if it is difficult." Lyra turned back to the ballroom, her gaze falling on the crowd of nobles twirling and bowing in perfect harmony. "I know, but it feels meaningless," she said softly. Her voice carried a weight of loneliness that Tavrik understood but could not easily fix. As the night continued, a sudden ripple of whispers passed through the ballroom like a wave. Every head turned toward the entrance, and even the music seemed to pause for a fraction of a heartbeat. All eyes were on the doorway. Lyra, curious, lifted herself slightly from her seat on the balcony. Through the grand doors stepped a figure unlike any the aliens had seen. A human. He was tall and upright, with a presence that commanded attention without a word. His clothes were simple, yet they carried a dignity that no ornate alien garment could match. He moved with a calm assurance, his eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. Unlike the aliens, who relied on ritual and performance, he walked as if he had no need for approval. Yet his gaze was respectful, careful not to offend. The nobles gasped softly, some in fear, others in fascination. Humans were considered fragile, their bodies weaker than most alien species. Their emotions, too, were thought to be uncontrolled, chaotic. Yet here he was, stepping into the palace as if he belonged. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Lyra's heart stirred. There was something different about him, something that drew her attention instantly. He did not carry the arrogance of a visitor who thought himself superior, nor the timidity of someone who feared being judged. He simply walked, quietly confident, and somehow it felt as though the noise of the world had softened around him. The human's eyes met hers for the first time. In that moment, Lyra felt an unfamiliar spark, a connection that went beyond words. She blinked, startled by the intensity of the feeling, and looked away quickly, as if acknowledging it might break some unspoken rule. But the spark lingered like a small flame refusing to die in the wind. The human continued moving through the crowd, bowing slightly to nobles, greeting them with words in their own tongue. His pronunciation was perfect, though slightly accented, and the nobles were both impressed and unnerved. Some whispered to each other, "How does he know our language so well?" while others simply stared, captivated by his calm presence. Lyra's curiosity grew stronger. She leaned over the balcony railing, wishing she could descend to see him up close. But more than curiosity, there was hope. A fragile hope that perhaps this human, so different from everything she had known, might understand her in ways others could not. Meanwhile, Tavrik watched from behind, noticing the subtle change in Lyra's expression. He had seen his princess react with interest before, but never like this. "The human," he muttered under his breath. "He is not ordinary. Be cautious, Lyra. Not all differences are safe." Lyra ignored the warning, her attention fully captured by the stranger moving with ease through the court. She wondered what he was thinking, why he had come, and whether he could see the loneliness she hid behind her smile. For a moment, the grand ballroom with all its beauty and chaos faded into the background. All that mattered was the presence of the human and the strange, magnetic pull she felt toward him. As the night went on, the music resumed and the nobles returned to their dances, though many kept stealing glances at the human. He navigated the crowd gracefully, not attempting to dominate the space, but leaving an impression on everyone he passed. Some whispered about his courage, some about his manners, and some quietly about the strange feeling of hope he seemed to bring into the room. Lyra remained on the balcony, torn between staying and stepping down. She watched him pause near a fountain in the center of the ballroom, his reflection shimmering in the water. For a brief moment he seemed to glance toward the balcony, and their eyes met again. Lyra's heart raced, and she felt an unusual warmth spread through her chest. She realized she could no longer remain hidden in her lonely corner. Something about this human made her want to reach out, to step into the unknown. Tavrik stepped closer, sensing the shift. "Your Highness, if you wish, you may descend," he said gently. "But be careful. Humans are unpredictable. We do not know their ways fully." Lyra nodded, her decision made. For the first time in many years, she felt a sense of courage. Perhaps this night and this human could change everything. Taking a deep breath, she moved toward the staircase, her gown trailing behind her like a river of light. The nobles noticed her movement and paused, sensing the significance of her descent. The princess, usually distant and reserved, was approaching the human with purpose. The human looked up from the fountain as she approached. Their eyes met again, and this time he smiled. A simple human smile that carried warmth, kindness, and an understanding that no alien expression could replicate. Lyra's own lips curved into a hesitant smile, and for a moment the grand ballroom fell silent. The music seemed to pause, the lights glimmered more brightly, and even the chatter of the nobles faded. All eyes were on the princess and the human. It was as if the world itself had noticed the beginning of something extraordinary, something that neither tradition nor fear could contain. Lyra felt her pulse quicken. The loneliness that had shadowed her life for so long began to lift, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human could see her, truly see her, in a way no one else ever had. And perhaps in this meeting the walls of tradition and fear would begin to crack, allowing something new, something human, to enter the heart of Zetheria. As she reached the bottom of the staircase, their paths finally crossed. And in that instant, the grand ball, full of music, color, and alien splendor, became the stage for a meeting that would change everything. The human extended his hand, not with ceremony but with sincerity. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. A quiet electricity passed between them, a feeling that neither of them could name yet but both recognized. The ballroom held its breath, waiting for the next moment, the first word, the first step toward a new era. And so the grand ball, which had started with elegance and protocol, began its transformation into something far greater, a night where the ordinary became extraordinary, and where a lonely princess might finally find someone who could see her heart. The human, Ethan, stood in the center of the ballroom, his hand gently holding the princess's. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, and even the music felt softer, as if it recognized the significance of this meeting. Lyra looked into his eyes, captivated by the calm confidence he carried. Unlike any alien she had ever met, he did not bend under the weight of protocol, nor did he flaunt arrogance. He was simply present, and that presence was enough to command attention. The nobles murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of curiosity, disapproval, and fascination. "A human. At a royal ball," one whispered, her wings fluttering nervously. "I thought humans were weak," another said, tilting his head. Yet even as they whispered, their eyes could not leave the pair. Ethan's calm and natural demeanor was unlike anything they had seen. It was as if he carried an invisible aura that demanded respect, not through power or status, but through simple humanity. Lyra felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. She had spent so long following rules, keeping her emotions hidden, and adhering to traditions that felt more like chains than guidance. Yet now, standing with Ethan, she felt a freedom she had never known. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from anticipation. For the first time in her life, she was not performing for anyone. She was simply herself. Ethan released her hand slightly, giving a small, respectful bow, and spoke softly yet clearly, in the common tongue of Zetheria. "Your Highness," he said, his voice calm and steady, "it is an honor to meet you. I have heard stories of your wisdom and your grace, but I hope to see the princess behind the crown." Lyra blinked. He could speak her language perfectly. And more than that, his words carried sincerity. No flattery, no empty praise. Just honesty. She felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation that made her feel more alive than she had in years. The nobles were stunned. Many had never heard a human speak with such poise, and fewer still had ever imagined one could engage with a princess so naturally. Some began to whisper nervously, unsure how to react. "Is this allowed?" one asked, adjusting his cloak. "He is not royalty. He does not belong here." But the whispers could not diminish what was happening in the center of the ballroom. Ethan and Lyra were already drawing closer with every exchanged glance, every subtle gesture. Lyra found herself smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes, something that had been rare in the sterile elegance of the palace. Ethan extended his hand again, inviting her to join him in a dance, not the ceremonial dance of the aliens, but a simple human dance. Lyra hesitated for a moment. Alien dances were intricate, rigid, and full of precise rules. A misstep could insult an entire family or clan, but there was something in Ethan's smile, a gentle encouragement that made her take the risk. She placed her hand in his once more. The music shifted slightly, adapting to their rhythm as though it recognized the uniqueness of their steps. Lyra realized she didn't have to follow the traditional movements perfectly. She only needed to move with him, trust him, and let herself be guided. And in that trust, a strange exhilaration filled her. The crowd watched in silence. The ballroom, usually alive with music and chatter, now seemed to pause. The nobles who had been skeptical or fearful were mesmerized. Some leaned closer to see how the human would move among them. Could someone so small, so different, truly hold their own in a world built for the alien elite? As the dance continued, Lyra began to laugh softly, a sound so rare that even Tavrik, who stood nearby, felt a shiver of surprise. Ethan's presence was infectious. His genuine joy, calm confidence, and simple respect for her allowed her to forget the stifling rules of the palace. She felt as if she could finally breathe. "You move well," Ethan said, his words soft but teasing, a human smile playing on his lips. "Better than most who have danced here for years." Lyra laughed again, the sound bright and unrestrained. I usually follow the rules," she admitted. "But with you, I feel like I can make my own steps." Ethan nodded, understanding. "That is what it means to be free," he said simply. "To be seen for who you are, not what others expect." For a moment, Lyra felt a lump in her throat. No one had ever said such words to her before, and the truth of them resonated deeply. She had always been admired for her appearance, her obedience, her status, but no one had ever acknowledged her inner world. And here was a human, a being considered fragile and insignificant by her people, speaking with wisdom that made her feel seen and understood. The nobles, meanwhile, began to murmur more audibly, some in admiration, some in disbelief. He actually fits in," one whispered, eyes wide. "And the princess." "She is smiling, truly smiling," another added. Some felt envy, others fascination. The human's simple acts of respect and courage were challenging centuries of assumptions and prejudice. Tavrik, ever cautious, stepped forward slightly. "Your Highness," he said, his voice low, "remember who you are. A human may be Different, but the palace is not yours alone. Be careful." Lyra shook her head slightly, ignoring the warning. Her eyes never left Ethan. "I am careful," she said softly. "But perhaps some rules are meant to be questioned." Ethan tilted his head, sensing her hesitation and fear beneath the excitement. "I do not wish to break rules," he said gently. "I only wish to walk beside you, even for a moment, in a way that feels true." The sincerity in his voice melted away the last remnants of fear in Lyra's heart. She realized that courage was not about defying rules recklessly. It was about choosing honesty over pretense even when it was risky, and in that realization she felt a strength she had never known. As they moved together, the ballroom seemed to transform. The music, once formal and distant, now seemed warmer, more alive. The nobles, too, began to soften. Some still whispered, but others watched with awe as the humans' calm and dignity influenced the atmosphere. The very air seemed to shift, acknowledging that something unusual and perhaps wonderful was unfolding. Ethan's movements were simple but deliberate. He guided Lyra with care, never forcing her, never judging her. His presence was steady, like a quiet river flowing through the grand hall. Lyra felt herself relax completely, letting go of all her fears and doubts. For the first time, she could simply be herself, and it felt miraculous. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your ways, your calm, it is beautiful." Ethan smiled, his eyes gentle. "And you, princess, are more than the world sees. You carry a light that is rare even among the stars." Lyra's heart fluttered at the words. She had always believed that her worth was tied to her title, her obedience, her place in society. Yet here was a human, someone from a world far removed from hers, telling her that she mattered simply for being herself. The ballroom's attention, once filled with judgment and curiosity, shifted subtly toward admiration. The nobles were beginning to realize that perhaps humans were not as insignificant as they had assumed. Perhaps there was something extraordinary in their courage, their honesty, and their ability to connect with others. The dance continued, slow and simple, yet it spoke volumes. Each movement, each glance, each shared smile conveyed a story more powerful than any ceremony. It was a story of trust, understanding, and the breaking of invisible walls that had held Lyra captive for so long. As the night progressed, whispers of admiration spread further. "He is remarkable," one noble said quietly. "And she shines brighter than ever," another added. Even the most skeptical eyes could not deny the truth. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Lyra felt a surge of courage. "Ethan," she said softly, "tonight, I feel alive. I have never felt this before, not even among my own people. You have shown me something I did not know I could feel." Ethan bowed his head slightly, his human way of showing respect. "I'm honored, Princess. That is all I ever hoped for, to be seen and to see." For the first time in her life, Lyra realized that perhaps rules and expectations were not the only path. Perhaps courage, honesty, and connection could create new ways of being, ways that were not bound by tradition or fear. And in that realization, a spark of hope ignited in her heart, one that she knew would not fade easily. The grand ballroom, once filled with music and chatter, now seemed to hum with possibility. The princess and the human danced not for ceremony, nor for applause, but for something far more profound: the discovery of a connection that transcended species, culture, and expectation. And in that connection, a new story began, one that would change the hearts of all who witnessed it. The grand ballroom of Zetheria had never been quieter. Normally, it pulsed with music, laughter, and the low hum of alien conversations. But now, the chatter had slowed. The notes of the instruments softened, and even the crystal chandeliers seemed to shimmer more gently, reflecting the collective astonishment of the guests. All eyes were on Princess Lyra and the human who had captured her attention. Lyra's hand rested lightly in Ethan's, her fingers brushing against his with a gentle familiarity that defied the rigid rules of palace etiquette. The nobles stared in disbelief. For centuries, the hierarchy had been clear. Humans were weak, unimportant, and not worthy of royal company. Yet here was one walking among them with quiet confidence. And not just walking, he was connecting with their princess, guiding her steps in a simple dance, speaking with her as if he had known her for a lifetime. The moment felt suspended, Like the universe itself had paused to witness this extraordinary event. No one dared speak. Even the musicians, instruments in hand, held their notes as if unsure whether to continue. Lyra felt her heart racing. She had never experienced such attention focused solely on her. Not for her status, not for her beauty, not for her wealth, but for who she was inside. And it was all because of him, Ethan, the human. You make it feel so simple, she said softly, her voice barely rising above a whisper.
Being here.
With everyone watching, it doesn't feel heavy or frightening anymore. Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady and calm. That is because you are not alone, he replied. Fear is easier when it is shared, and courage is stronger when it is true. You are brave, Lyra, I see that, even if others cannot. The words touched her more deeply than she could have imagined. She had always been brave in ways the court never noticed, quietly challenging expectations, asking questions they considered unfit, imagining worlds beyond the palace walls. But no one had ever acknowledged her courage. Now, a human did, and it felt revolutionary. The nobles, meanwhile, were murmuring among themselves, their earlier curiosity shifting toward unease. Some leaned closer to their companions, whispering cautiously. Do you see it? One asked, eyes wide. He speaks to her as though they are equals, and she responds as if she has never known fear. Another noble shook his head, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly. This is not right, he muttered. Humans are not part of our hierarchy. Yet she is smiling, truly smiling. Lyra noticed the growing tension in the room, but ignored it. She focused on Ethan, on the genuine presence he brought to the night. There was something about him that defied expectation, that challenged centuries of prejudice without even trying. He did not demand recognition. He simply existed with honesty and strength, and that alone commanded respect. Ethan tilted his head slightly, observing the crowd, sensing their tension, yet remaining unshaken. Do not let them frighten you, he whispered to Lyra. They may not understand, but that is not your concern. Your heart knows the truth. Lyra nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. For too long, she had let rules and fear dictate her actions. Tonight, with Ethan by her side, she felt a courage she could not have imagined. And that courage was contagious. As they moved together across the ballroom floor, a small ripple of change began to spread. Some nobles, initially rigid and suspicious, found themselves drawn into the moment, unable to resist the authenticity they saw before them. The music, too, began to swell gently, carrying a warmth and fluidity that mirrored the human princess connection. Suddenly, a loud gasp echoed through the room. All eyes turned toward the far side of the ballroom, where a particularly influential noble, Lord Xylar, had risen from his place. His long, iridescent cloak shimmered in the chandelier light, and his multiple arms were raised in protest. This is unacceptable, he declared, his voice booming over the murmurs. A human has no right to approach the princess. He does not belong in our midst. The room froze. The gasps were louder now. Some nobles murmured in agreement, while others, surprisingly, shook their heads in silent disbelief. Lyra felt a wave of fear rise in her chest. She had not expected such opposition. But then she looked at Ethan. His expression remained calm, unwavering, grounded in a quiet confidence that seemed unshakable. He did not flinch or retreat. Instead, he gave a gentle human smile, a smile that conveyed patience, understanding, and courage. He spoke, his voice clear and even, reaching every corner of the ballroom. I am not here to challenge your traditions or to claim a place I have not earned. I am here because Princess Lyra allowed me to be here. That is all that matters. The words struck a chord in the room. Silence fell again, deeper than before. Nobles exchanged confused glances. Some mouths moved, forming questions they dared not speak aloud. How could a human command such respect without rank or power? How could a being they considered fragile radiate such confidence and understanding? Lyra felt her chest swell with pride and relief. He was not only speaking for himself, but for her as well. For the first time, she realized that her presence and choices mattered, not because of her crown, but because of who she was as a person. She was not defined by fear or expectation. She was defined by her courage, her heart, and her ability to connect with another being. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Ethan's, and found the strength to speak. You see me, she said, her voice trembling slightly but carrying clarity. You see me not as a princess but as me, and that is enough. Ethan bowed slightly, acknowledging her words. Yes, Lyra. That is all that matters. The nobles remained silent, still stunned by the scene unfolding before them. The human had not only approached the princess, but he had also spoken with respect, honesty, and courage, without demanding anything. The princess had responded with trust, strength, and grace. In that quiet, the entire ballroom seemed to shift. The old rules, the prejudices and the assumptions could not withstand the truth of the moment. Even Lord Xylar, who had spoken so loudly against the human, found himself hesitant. His multiple eyes blinked rapidly as he studied Ethan, studying Lyra, trying to reconcile centuries of belief with the reality before him. There was no challenge in Ethan's words, no threat in his presence. There was only truth, courage, and connection, and it was undeniable. Lyra felt a thrill of excitement and fear. The moment of silence, heavy as it was, carried possibility. Anything could happen now. Traditions could be questioned. Hearts could change. And all of it had begun because she had chosen to trust the human, and because he had chosen to meet her as an equal. A soft, almost imperceptible hum rose from the instruments in the ballroom. The musicians had begun to play again, cautiously at first, their notes tentative but beautiful. The sound filled the room with warmth, carrying the unspoken message that change was possible, that courage could bend even the most rigid rules. Ethan extended his hand once more, inviting Lyra to walk with him beyond the center of the ballroom. She followed, her steps confident now, her heart light. The nobles parted slightly, some unwillingly, some with curiosity, some with admiration. Each movement, each glance, each small smile reinforced the quiet power of their connection. The silence was no longer awkward. It was sacred. Every noble in the room felt it. The power of being seen, the courage to trust, and the transformative force of honesty. Lyra felt it in her chest, a warmth spreading through her body that she had never experienced before. She realized that this human, small and fragile by alien standards, had achieved what no alien could. He had made her feel truly alive. As they reached a quiet corner of the ballroom, Ethan spoke softly so only she could hear. Lyra, you are not alone. Tonight is only the beginning. Your courage, your heart, your choices, they matter. Do not forget that. Lyra nodded, a tear forming at the edge of her luminescent eye. I will not forget, she whispered.
I have felt something tonight.
Something real, and it is because of you. Ethan smiled again, a simple human smile filled with warmth and hope. Then let us see where this night takes us, he said, and with that the moment of silence held not judgment but reverence. The grand ballroom, once ruled by tradition, fear, and expectation, had been transformed in the span of a single dance, a single exchange of words, and a single act of courage. The princess and the human stood together, a quiet force of change, and for the first time, everyone in the room understood that something extraordinary had begun. The night was far from over, and yet in that moment, the story had already changed. The grand ballroom of Zytheria was no longer just a place of music and ceremony. It had become a stage for something entirely new, a place where old rules could be questioned and hearts could be opened. After the moment of silence, the nobles felt the weight of change pressing upon them. Some resisted, clinging to centuries of tradition, while others watched with awe, curiosity, and a budding sense of admiration for the human who dared to defy expectation with calm grace. Princess Lyra stood beside Ethan, her hand brushing against his as they moved slowly through the room. Her eyes sparkled and her posture had shifted. No longer reserved and tense, she now radiated confidence and warmth. For the first time in her life, she felt completely free to be herself, without fear of judgment or reprisal. Ethan's presence was a quiet force, like a river cutting through solid stone, shaping the landscape of the court without aggression or demand. He did not raise his voice, nor did he flaunt any power. He simply treated Lyra as an equal, spoke with honesty, and moved with calm assurance. And that, the nobles realized, was more powerful than any rank, weapon, or title they had ever known. The whispers among the crowd had grown louder, but the tone had changed. They were no longer filled with fear or disdain. Instead, some voices carried admiration. He moves with dignity, one noble murmured, and the princess, she seems happier than I have ever seen her. Others were less willing to accept the change. Lord Xylar, still fuming from the earlier confrontation, muttered to his companions. "This human is dangerous. He undermines centuries of order. If the princess is influenced by him, what will happen to our customs?" But even Xylar could not deny the truth he saw. Lyra's demeanor had shifted completely. She laughed freely, spoke with warmth, and moved as if the weight of expectation had been lifted. She was no longer just a figurehead to be admired from afar. She was alive, radiant, and unafraid. Lyra turned to Ethan, her eyes shining. "I never imagined I could feel like this," she said softly. "I always thought my life would be measured by rules, expectations, and appearances. But with you, it feels different. Real." Ethan smiled, his gaze steady. "That is the way humans often live," he said. "We are not bound by the same rules as your court. We follow what feels true to us. And courage, honesty, and kindness, those are what matter most." Lyra felt a thrill at his words. It was a revelation she had never considered. All her life, she had measured herself by obedience, perfection, and appearances. But now she realized that true strength lay not in following rules blindly, but in living honestly and bravely, even when others doubted you. Encouraged by Ethan's presence, Lyra began to speak more openly to the nobles around her. She asked questions, laughed with curiosity, and even challenged some minor customs in ways that were bold yet respectful. Each action, no matter how small, sent ripples of change through the ballroom. Some nobles frowned, clinging to tradition, but others leaned in, intrigued by the possibility that they too could be more than the roles they had been assigned. Ethan noticed the subtle reactions of the nobles and offered guidance in small, gentle ways. He did not lecture or command, but his calm confidence encouraged others to think for themselves. His presence suggested that differences were not weaknesses, and that courage and integrity could inspire change without force. One noble, Lady Sareth, approached cautiously. I do not understand," she said quietly. "Humans are supposed to be fragile, weak, and unpredictable. Yet, he moves with strength, and the princess, she responds with trust." Ethan inclined his head respectfully. "Strength is not always measured by power or skill," he said. "Sometimes it is measured by honesty, courage, and the willingness to connect with others. That is true strength, and it is often underestimated." Lady Sareth's eyes widened as she considered his words. For the first time, she began to question the assumptions she had been taught since birth. Perhaps humans were not so weak. Perhaps they possessed qualities that the court had long ignored or undervalued. And perhaps, in seeing the princess smile and laugh with Ethan, she had glimpsed a truth that transcended species and tradition. Meanwhile, Lyra's laughter rang through the ballroom like a bell of freedom. Nobles who had been rigid and fearful found themselves drawn to her energy, unable to resist the warmth she radiated. She spoke openly, not as a princess constrained by expectations, but as a person exploring what it meant to live fully, to feel deeply, and to trust. Tavrik, watching from a distance, could hardly believe the transformation. "Your Highness," he said gently, "you are different, more alive than ever." Lyra smiled at him, her eyes sparkling. "I am different, Tavrik, and it feels wonderful. I cannot explain it fully, but it feels real, and I owe it to him, the human who has shown me that being true to myself is more powerful than any rule." The room seemed to respond to her words. Even the nobles who had resisted the human's presence could not ignore the change in the princess. Some lowered their heads in thought, questioning traditions they had never dared to challenge. Others watched silently, curious to see what would come next. Ethan remained beside Lyra, guiding her gently, speaking quietly, and offering subtle encouragement. "The court is beginning to see," he whispered. "They may not understand fully, but they are beginning to realize that courage and honesty matter more than rank or species." Lyra nodded. "It is remarkable," she said softly. "And it makes me feel hopeful. Perhaps we can change more than just tonight. Perhaps we can change how people see each other, how they think about humans, about differences, about courage, Ethan smiled, proud yet humble. Change begins with a single step, he said, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to act with honesty, kindness, and courage. Encouraged by this thought, Lyra began to speak to the nobles around her, asking them about their hopes, their fears, and their ideas for the future. She listened with genuine interest, laughed with delight at their stories, and offered insights that were thoughtful and kind. Slowly, the ballroom transformed from a space of rigid tradition into a space of dialogue, curiosity, and possibility. Even Lord Xyler, who had opposed Ethan so strongly, found himself reconsidering. He watched quietly, noticing how the human moved with respect, spoke with honesty, and inspired not only Lyra but also the other nobles. Perhaps, he thought grudgingly, there was more to humans than the court had believed. Perhaps they could teach lessons in courage, patience, and integrity that no alien tradition could match. Lyra felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had spent so long hiding her true self, following rules, and suppressing her feelings. But now, standing with Ethan, she felt alive in a way that was exhilarating and profound. The human's presence had unlocked a part of her heart that she had long ignored, the part that longed for freedom, trust, and connection. As the night continued, Lyra and Ethan moved together, speaking to nobles, sharing laughter, and demonstrating the power of simple, genuine connection. Each interaction sent ripples through the ballroom, challenging assumptions, opening minds, and inspiring courage. The human's presence was not a threat. It was a catalyst for growth, understanding, and hope. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The nobles no longer whispered in fear or suspicion. Many spoke with admiration and curiosity, acknowledging the strength, courage, and wisdom they had witnessed. Some even approached Ethan, cautiously at first, to ask questions and seek understanding. Lyra looked around at the transformed ballroom and felt a sense of triumph, not for herself but for the possibilities that lay ahead. With courage, honesty, and the willingness to connect, she had helped create a space where old rules could be questioned and new ideas could take root. And she knew that Ethan, the human who had entered her life so unexpectedly, was the reason this change had begun. She turned to him, her eyes bright. "Tonight, we have done something remarkable," she said softly. "Not just for us, but for everyone here. Perhaps they will begin to see humans differently, and perhaps they will see themselves differently too." Ethan nodded, his smile gentle and proud. "It is only the beginning," he said. "Change takes time, but tonight we have shown what is possible, and that is always a powerful start." Lyra's heart swelled with hope and determination. She realized that courage was not about defiance alone, nor was strength measured by power. True courage was in being honest, kind, and willing to connect with others, even when it was risky. And true strength was in using that courage to inspire change, to open hearts, and to challenge assumptions that had stood for centuries. The ballroom, once a place of rigid tradition and expectation, now hummed with possibility. Nobles whispered, observed, and reflected. Some questioned old rules, some admired the human's courage, and some simply watched in wonder. But all had witnessed something extraordinary, a princess who had found her voice, a human who had shown courage without arrogance, and a connection that had begun to break the chains of tradition. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment and the promise it carried. She knew that the night was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready for whatever came next. With Ethan by her side, she understood that courage, honesty, and connection could. The grand ballroom of Zytheria was alive in a way it had never been before. The air shimmered not just from the crystal chandeliers but from the subtle energy of change. Noble voices no longer carried whispers of fear or suspicion. Instead, they spoke with curiosity, admiration, and cautious hope. Princess Lyra and the human Ethan had transformed the evening from a simple royal ball into a living testament of courage, honesty, and connection. Lyra felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had spent countless years confined by rules, tradition, and expectation, her life measured by ceremony and propriety. Yet tonight, standing beside Ethan, she had discovered something far more powerful: freedom. Not just the freedom to act, but the freedom to feel, to trust, and to inspire. She realized that strength was not measured by titles or protocol, but by courage, empathy, and the willingness to see the truth in others. Ethan's presence was as calm and steady as ever, his human simplicity bringing clarity and balance to the otherwise complex and ornate ballroom. He had not sought recognition or praise. He had simply been himself, honest, respectful, courageous, and in doing so he had shifted the course of the entire court. The nobles moved around them with a mixture of awe and contemplation. Some, like Lady Sereth, approached cautiously, eager to understand the human who had changed the princess and indirectly their world. "I never thought humans could carry such dignity," she whispered to her companion. "And yet, here we are witnessing it." Others, however, remained skeptical. Lord Xylar still scowled, his multiple eyes blinking rapidly as he observed Ethan and Lyra. "I do not trust this human," he muttered. "He is unusual, too bold. Our traditions exist for a reason." But even Xylar could not deny the truth he saw unfolding. Lyra's energy, her laughter, and her confidence radiated power far beyond any ritual or expectation. And Ethan, with his calm wisdom and quiet strength, had created a presence that could not be ignored. Lyra turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement and determination. "Tonight, we have done something remarkable," she said softly. "Not just for us, but for everyone here. Perhaps they will begin to see humans differently. Perhaps they will see themselves differently, too." Ethan nodded, his smile warm and reassuring. "It is only the beginning," he said. "Change takes time. But tonight has shown what is possible when courage and honesty lead the way." As they spoke, the music shifted once more. The musicians, inspired by the human-princess connection, played a melody that was at once traditional and fresh. It carried warmth, hope, and an openness that reflected the mood of the room. Some nobles even began to dance again, tentatively at first, following Lyra's lead rather than strict protocol. Laughter and soft conversation filled the room, blending with the music in a way that felt natural, joyful, and alive. Lyra felt a surge of pride and joy. She had helped create a moment where the rigid walls of tradition began to crack, revealing a space for understanding, curiosity, and growth. And she knew that this change was not limited to one night. It could extend far beyond the palace walls. Humans, once seen as fragile and insignificant, could now be recognized for their courage, empathy, and the power of their presence. Ethan offered his hand once more, inviting Lyra to step toward the balcony. Together they moved with a simple grace, pausing to observe the transformed ballroom. The nobles were still talking and dancing, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and some with hesitant acceptance. "Look at them," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "They are beginning to understand. Perhaps they will carry this forward. Perhaps they will remember that courage and honesty matter more than tradition alone." Ethan smiled. "Yes, Lyra, and the best part is, this change does not belong to us alone. It belongs to everyone willing to see the truth and act with courage." They paused at the balcony, gazing out over the city of Zetheria. The lights below twinkled like stars, reflecting the glittering skyline of towers and bridges, each one a symbol of the kingdom's history. And yet tonight history felt alive, flexible, and capable of transformation. Lyra took a deep breath. "I have spent so long feeling alone," she admitted softly. "But tonight, I do not feel lonely anymore. I feel understood, seen, and strong. And I owe it to you, Ethan. You have shown me something I never imagined possible." Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and warm. "You found that courage within yourself, Lyra," he said. "I only helped you see it. That strength was always yours." A gentle hush fell over the ballroom again. Even the skeptical nobles could sense the quiet power of their bond. It was not a display of arrogance or dominance, but a simple and profound truth. Two beings, different in species and culture, could connect, understand, and inspire. The room seemed to hold its breath, recognizing that what had begun tonight was far greater than any ceremony or tradition. Tavrik approached, his expression softened with awe. "Your Highness," he said, his voice quiet, "you have changed tonight. Not just yourself, but the entire court. I have never seen anything like it." Lyra smiled at him, her confidence shining. "It is only the beginning, Tavrik. There is much work to do, But tonight has shown that change is possible, and sometimes change begins with something as simple as honesty, courage, and connection. Ethan nodded. Exactly. And humans, despite what others may think, can be part of that change. We may be different, but our differences are not weaknesses. They are strengths. The nobles began to approach more openly, some with cautious questions, others with admiration, and a few with tentative apologies for their earlier skepticism. Each interaction was a small step toward understanding, acceptance, and a new perspective on humanity. Lyra felt a warmth in her chest that went beyond excitement. She realized that leadership was not just about command or ceremony. It was about inspiring courage, fostering understanding, and creating spaces where truth and honesty could flourish. And with Ethan by her side, she felt capable of leading in a way that honored both tradition and progress. As the night drew on, the ballroom became a place of laughter, learning, and hope. Nobles shared stories, discussed ideas, and danced in ways that felt natural rather than forced. The human-princess connection had sparked something extraordinary. The realization that change was not only possible, but desirable. Lyra and Ethan moved together through the crowd, speaking to nobles, offering guidance, and simply being present. Each smile, each gentle word, each thoughtful gesture reinforced the truth that courage, empathy, and honesty could inspire even the most rigid hearts. By the end of the evening, the transformation was clear. The nobles, once rigid and fearful, had begun to embrace curiosity, admiration, and hope. Even Lord Xylar, though still hesitant, had begun to reconsider his assumptions about humans and the power of simple, genuine connection. Lyra stood at the center of the ballroom, looking around at the transformed scene. She felt a sense of pride, joy, and profound hope. "Tonight," she said softly to Ethan, "we have done something extraordinary. We have shown them that humans are not weak, that courage matters, and that connection can change hearts." Ethan smiled warmly. "Yes, Lyra, and this is only the beginning. What we have started tonight will continue, growing stronger with each act of courage, each gesture of honesty, and each choice to see the truth." Lyra nodded. "Then let us continue, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who will follow. This is our chance to create a new era, one where understanding, courage, and kindness lead the way." The ballroom, once a place of rigid tradition and expectation, now hummed with possibility. Nobles laughed, danced, and conversed freely, their eyes bright with curiosity and hope. The grand palace had witnessed something extraordinary. A princess who had found her voice, a human who had inspired courage, and a court beginning to see beyond fear and tradition. Lyra felt the night settle around her like a warm embrace. She had been lonely for so long, confined by expectation and duty. But tonight she had discovered something far more valuable: connection, trust, and the courage to live authentically. And beside her, Ethan stood as proof that even the most unexpected presence could spark transformation, inspire courage, and create hope. As the final notes of music faded into the night, the ballroom erupted in applause, not just for the princess or the human, but for the extraordinary possibility they had shown. That courage, honesty, and empathy could break even the oldest chains, and that a single act of understanding could ignite a new era. Lyra looked at Ethan, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me this, for being here, for everything." Ethan took her hand gently, his eyes steady and kind. "No, Lyra," he said softly. "Thank you. You trusted me. You believed. And you allowed courage to guide your heart. That is the true power." The night had changed everything. The princess was no longer lonely. The human had proven that bravery and kindness could leave a lasting mark. And the court, once bound by fear and tradition, had glimpsed a future where differences were celebrated, courage was honored, and hearts could be united across worlds. As Lyra looked around the ballroom, she knew that this was only the beginning. Humans would be seen differently, traditions could evolve, and she herself would continue to lead with the courage, honesty, and heart she had discovered tonight. The grand palace of Zytheria had witnessed the birth of a new era, one where hope, courage, and connection transcended her and